And if the proposal isn't the right option or not the one that the person ends up choosing, obviously there is a bankruptcy option as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As Michelle said, CRA debt, income tax debt can be included in the proposal, can be included in the bankruptcy. But what happens when that amount of debt becomes very large? So there is a special rule that if the income tax debt is over $200,000, there can be some special rules. John H., can you talk a little bit about what that is about and how that could affect a bankruptcy?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. So just to dovetail what John had just finished saying. So typically you would explore the proposal options, either consumer or division one. And if it doesn't seem like that's a viable option, then you've got to be conscious of what the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act says about a high tax debtor. So the act was amended a few years back to specifically target high tax debtors. And they call them to quantify high tax debtors to be those individuals who have income tax debt greater than $200,000 to Canada Revenue Agency. And that debt in itself is 75% of the total proven unsecured creditors in a bankruptcy. And if we find ourselves at that position, what the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act says is that debtor cannot be released from their debts until such time as the trustee, the debtor, and CRA appear before the court. And it is a requirement that CRA must be there along with this in this process. And what happens in court is essentially the debtor provides evidence, usually with support of a legal counsel, and the CRA attends and provides their evidence and makes recommendations to the court, and then the court decides. Our role in this process is very important. We help navigate the debtor through this process. We don't let you go in alone, but we are a middle party in the context of the bankruptcy, so we can't really take sides, but we will direct you to, for example, obtain legal counsel, because it's important, because your lawyer's got to argue on your behalf. As the trustee, we cannot argue in favor of you versus a creditor. We can just give our position. And when we look at our position going forward, the court does look to us for recommendations. They see value in what we do. And the court would come to a trustee like myself and ask what I think the discharge process should look like for the debtor. And the options in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act are: one, it's just a period of time, or two, it can be a monetary value that has to be paid either over time. Flexibility is also key to this process, but you can't simply just get discharged from the debt. So the judge does have to render a decision, and the decision is usually one, a time penalty, payment, or both. But sort of target some guidelines for you. There are some examples, for example, in a file. Recently I've been to court where a tax debtor had in excess of $400,000 of proven Canada Revenue debt. So the debt wasn't in dispute. The debtor just could not pay it. And it was as a result of a number of reassessments over a number of years. It just, to an earlier point, got sort of out of hand and coming to the conclusion that bankruptcy was the only option. That debt was settled on payments into the court in the amount of $42,000 over a period of time. So a significant reduction, not zero, but again, when we look at the context of the file, the debtor is very happy that the amount is significantly much lower. There's no further interest on that debt. And the payments are made to us in full satisfaction of the CRA debt. So when the last payment is made, the process concludes with the trustee going back to court and advising the court that the debtor has complied with the conditions of the discharge, and the bankrupt or the debtor is discharged automatically from bankruptcy. And that's really important process and helps debtors significantly when the proposal option is just not really viable because the tax debt is just too high.
Yeah, good points. And just to clarify, the word discharge is, if you think of somebody going into bankruptcy to deal with their debt, if that was the right option, the discharge is the terminology or the piece of paper that somebody gets to come out of bankruptcy. And so, yeah, to John H. Discussions that even in a situation where there's very large income tax debt owing, there are terms to come out of a bankruptcy, just like there are terms in the proposal option that John A. talked about, there can be terms, and it just depends on the facts of the case, like we mentioned, and eventually the judge would make the decision. So
Correct.
John
And
A. Oh, sorry,
sorry,
go
just
ahead.
to finish that too, and the word discharge also means extinguishing the debt, that they go hand in hand. So when you're released from the bankruptcy, the debt is also just is released. So the debt is gone.
Yeah. And then they just have to comply with whatever those terms in the court order or the discharge order was.